I'm going to get started. Thanks everybody for coming. For those that don't recall, we used to do this sort of stuff like every other month, but it's been a while since our last one. So we're going to be picking these up again. Hopefully we can do these every other month or so. This is our first time using Center Code. So a big thank you to Center Code for allowing us to have an event here. For those who don't know, Center Code is a software and hardware testing company. They've been around for about 15 years, cool people. And they're also gamers, so they're really excited to have stuff like this going on. Let's see, so going over some quick office rules. There are chairs blocking that end over there. Don't walk that way, that's where their office stuff is. The only thing for us, pizza, the beverages in the cooler, water, try not to go into their back kitchen area. Definitely don't use their alcohol, that's theirs. Let's see, and also please pick up after yourselves. If you have trash, there's trash cans in the kitchen. We're all adults, so that should be pretty straightforward. IGDA news. We're going to have another mixer next week. It's the first Wednesday of February, so first Wednesday of every month we do our mixers of the Old Dubliner. That event will be posted tomorrow. We would have posted it earlier, but we didn't want to have too much confusion with this event coming up, so stay tuned for that. And then the last bit of IGDA news, we're always looking for volunteers or any help or suggestions for future talks. So if you're interested in helping out for the IGDA, feel free to reach out to me, Dan, where's other Dan? Dan Speck back there is another one of our guys, and Tyler Cushing is downstairs watching the doors. So we can always use help. If you have any ideas, just feel free to talk to us after the event. So that's it for IGDA administrative stuff. I'm going to turn it over to our guest speaker, Clayton Stone.
All right.
Clayton, the floor is yours.
Great. Hi, everybody. If I haven't met you already, I'm Clay Stone. I work at FoxNext Games, and this is a presentation all about FoxNext Games. Okay. So really quick, I just want to take a second to thank Center Code, the IGDA OC, Jason Fader, Dan Speck for putting this all together, and thank all of you for coming to this. So here we go. So what am I going to talk about? For the most part, this is going to be a little bit of a high-level discussion just about FoxNext in general, what we do, what projects we choose to collaborate on, and then what does it look like when it all comes together. I'll run through one of our games to do that. But if at any point you have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand. I'm happy to answer them, and then also afterwards too. Okay, so quick disclaimer. Any and all opinions presented are my own and do not represent my current or past employers in any way, shape, or form. All brands, IP, and related assets, Foxes or otherwise, are the property of their respective owners. Like this guy. Okay, so great way to kick off a talk, right? I know this makes it sound a lot scarier than it actually is, but just have to do this. So okay, so here we go. All about me. So this is me and my wife and our dog, which is my family. We dressed up as Marty and Jennifer for Halloween last year. Fun times. Here's our dog. She was dressed up as Einstein, the dog from the film, not the scientist. And here are two specifically non-Fox brands that I like. Shocker, I'm sure. But then I bring it back around because now we're back to Fox stuff again. Okay, one of my favorite American Dad episodes.
How much does it cost to rent it for boring?
So I actually own that one. Yeah. Yeah, that's actually, but I don't know. But if you're looking to rent one, I'm not, it's a weekend one for me, so weekdays, parties, events, something like that. It's turning into a whole different conversation. Okay. All right, so a little bit more about me. I'm from the Corona Del Mar area, which for this presentation I found out is actually called the Seaside Garden Village, for those of you who didn't know that. And unfortunately, it means I spend a lot of time doing this and this to get to work, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. So what does my work history look like? These are just a few of the fun places I've worked over the years. That's basically it. Okay, so what is FoxNext? Well, according to this slide, FoxNext is Marvel Strike Force, which is not necessarily true, and I hope through this presentation we'll be able to show you that FoxNext is actually a lot more than Marvel Strike Force. Okay, so jumping back, I figured I would talk about the formation of FoxNext and how this all came together. Way back in the mystical time before 2017, or what some would call the before 4 times, you basically had all of these different teams and groups building games and interactive experiences within the greater international company. Each falling somewhere within the greater Fox organization, and in some ways unknowingly, even when I was with the team at this time, competing with each other. One could say it was quite the web of an org structure. Thank you. So here's one more look at a time. But it really gives you a sense of just how convoluted things were. And then in early January of 2017, Fox pivoted when they had an idea. And they said, what if we partnered with the only still independent member of Kabam after a big Netmarble transaction, and combine that with all of our existing games and interactive media producers. At the time, some said, I apologize in advance, there was an idea to bring together a group of remarkable teams to see if they could become something more. So when the world needed them, they could make even greater games unlike ever before. All right, that was my best slide. I spent all night last night on that. The rest of this presentation, it is all downhill from here. So if you're only staying for the best part, you just saw it. Anyways, okay. So FoxNext was formed as a single organization within 21st Century Fox, going through the Fox Networks Group team. And we have locations in Los Angeles, San Jose, and San Francisco. So what does this look like? And what do these teams do? So FoxNext Games Los Angeles is working on Marvel Strike Force, which you're familiar with. They're also working on a mobile title for James Cameron's Avatar, which we haven't released any details about yet, but it has been released that it is being worked on. We have Cold Iron, which is located in San Jose. They are working on a multiplayer Alien game, which we've announced. And then we have Fogbank, which unfortunately I'm only able to put a question mark for here. But what's so cool about this, and what didn't exist before 2017, and I'm stealing a quote from Cory Barlog here, the director of God of War, is that the knowledge share between these studios allows us to have rapid learning scenarios, which can result in problems being solved that used to take 3 days in just 30 minutes. So much more collaboration than we used to have. And so the final piece of this, oh, thank you. Okay. So the final piece of this, working in Los Angeles with the FoxNext Games LA studio, is the XDev team, which is the group that I'm a part of. So XDev stands for External Development, not X-Development employees. Believe it or not, people get that confused quite often. They're like, oh, what do you work on? I'm like, oh, XDev. They're like, oh, so you don't work. So what is FoxNext Games XDev? Well, it's the team that works with all external development partners to produce games based on all of Fox's TV shows, films, and properties. So what about the games that we produced? Well, in my time at the company, which is now around 4 years or so, which sounds crazy to me because time's flown by, we've been the team at Fox that's handled the release and live ops of all of these mobile titles. This went a lot faster when I did it on here. I think anyways. And then also a handful of console titles as well, like Alien Isolation. And we're currently working on the very, very large AAA Avatar game with Ubisoft's massive studio. And then plenty of other possible projects that I can't talk about yet. So looking at just our most recent release, this was actually last week. For those of you who haven't seen it, we worked with D3 and Rival Games to produce Alien Blackout. So Alien Blackout is a premium horror survival game for mobile devices. As part of our marketing efforts, we and our partners joined with the Nerdist Industries and Geek and Sundry to promote the release. And they had a bit of a competition to see who could perform better at the game. but under a little bit of extreme circumstances, as you're about to see. So here's a quick trailer for what they put together, but you can find the full version online. And if you're familiar with those companies, then I'm sure you'll recognize a few of the players in here too.
Alien Blackout is a new, fear-inducing horror premium mobile game, and today, Team Curtis and Team Geek and Sundry are taking the Alien Blackout Challenge. In teams of 3, we're going to try to outsmart the perfect hunter to see which team can make it through the level with the fastest time. Each team member had a limited amount of time to complete the level while playing the blackout booth, with a few extra spheres tossed in to keep us on our toes and help add pressure to the competition. Oh, get up. Come on! I don't see the Z no more. Maybe that means he's near me.
Just go in the direction.
I see it right there. Well, she's winning. We did it. Alien Blackout is available now on the Apple App Store, Google Play, and the Amazon App Store.
So there we go. All right, so jumping into the FoxNext process with Mr. Sparkle. So choosing projects. So what I want to do is dive a little bit into our process at FoxNext and hopefully shine a bit more light on specifically what my team does. So how do we choose our projects? Well, when we're not producing a game in-house with one of our in-house studios, we use 3 key factors to determine what projects to work on. Those 3 factors are partner, brand, and timing. And then the perfect intersection of those is where the theoretical perfect game exists. Because we all know there are perfect games out there. So looking at the partner section of this. So these are the key considerations which, while not revolutionary, I'm sure to anybody here, are certainly important when determining whether or not we're going to proceed with the title. We're looking for a developer that already has established themselves with other titles. If they display a passion already for a brand, that is a huge component of the equation for us. They've shown mastery of a certain genre with past titles. They already have a solid game engine. And then super important these days, especially in the mobile space, is can they market and acquire users? Jumping over to the brand side and looking at the brand itself, does the brand and game genre fit? So does it make sense to do something like, let's say, a Bob's Burgers game, but make it like Diner Dash? Or if you know the show, the places that they go beyond Wonder Wharf could lead to a game that's a much better fit than just a simple Diner Dash clone. And then, of course, what's the size of the audience of the property that we want to work on? And is it big enough to support a full game release? And does the size of the brand also have enough content to support a full game and potentially continue to support the game with more content for a very, very long period of time to come? And then lastly is timing. And the key considerations that we look at for this as Stewie warps through time and space is, are there any greater events happening around the brand that we can link into? Will the brand creators, the stakeholders, and the production team that actually works on the show or the film actually have the bandwidth to help us in supporting the game? What is the current market demand for a title like this? And lastly, what does the competitive landscape look like? So here's a world map provided graciously by www.freeworldmaps.com. We've been incredibly lucky in my time at Fox to be able to work with some of the best partners in the world. And this map shows, I think as you can tell, that they're pretty spread out across the globe. We haven't quite hit all the continents yet. And this certainly doesn't show all of them, but it does represent some of the most recent. It also means that we have regular calls at crazy hours of the day. So let's look at this team-based development structure and how we work with our partners on these titles. So if I were to draw a line between these two extremes, one of which basically stating that we're totally blind and we just hand off our brands to any old developer and we ask them to call us when it's done, or the other extreme in which we're working hand in hand with them throughout the game's design and development, which one do you think we go more towards? And to make this easier, Let's call this the Superman 64 versus Batman Arkham City scale. It's probably no surprise, but we lean heavily towards partnership with all of our games developers. So jumping into pitch development, what does that mean? Well, it means we actually do a ton of work with our partners before they even officially become our partners. There's a whole step-to-step green light process scenario. What's the word I'm looking for? Green light process, that we take these projects through, and part of it is pitching to the actual series or film stakeholders. So we collaborate with them to solidify the project vision. You're going to hear me talk a lot about the project vision. What is the player or fan experience within this game? We help them refine the core design. Of course, what is the business model for something like this? Is it premium? Is it free to play? We work with them to nail the art style. As I'm sure you can tell when you're doing a live action base game, or even a lot of animated base games, you have to work a lot on translating that art style to the game space. And then since we are a storytelling company, we focus a ton on making sure we're telling a compelling story, no matter the game. So one great example of all this is a title called Animation Throwdown. Just by a quick show of hands, how many of you are familiar with Animation Throwdown? Great, okay. So this was probably the most challenging to develop game that I've ever worked on. Part of this was due to pure content scope, but it more so was due to the fact that it involved 3 very talented developers, us, and 5 of Fox's most famous animated TV series, all in one free-to-play collectible card game. But it wasn't just that 3 game devs were working on it with us, it was also that we were taking 5 shows with 5 very distinct art styles and trying to put them together in one game. And when I say that the shows are distinct, I mean that typical boring elements that you would never normally think of end up coming into conflict with each other. For example, which show's sidewalks do we use? What does an explosion in one show look like in another? What height scale are we going to use to make sure none of the characters look too short or too tall when standing next to each other? Because believe it or not, there have been some crossovers between these shows, but not all of them have connected in the past. So we don't actually know how tall Hank Hill is when standing next to, let's say, Bob Belcher. And then I think probably the most challenging aspect of the entire production was actually coming up with what the conceit was going to be that was going to force all these different brands and their worlds into one game itself. And so here's a look at the initial launch menu screen, which has changed quite a bit since then. And our solution was just to take the different brands and put them on different islands and try not to let them interact. The problem with this was it became very clear that that's what we were doing, and we really wanted to mash up those characters and be able to have Hank Hill talk to Leela from Futurama. So the further that we got through the production process, past soft launch, into worldwide launch, and the more comfortable that we got our brand stakeholders to be with scenarios like this, the more that we were able to play with that sort of thing. So here's a little bit of behind the scenes artwork. When we were working on the conceit, we probably worked through at least, I'd say, a dozen full story intros for what the narrative for this was going to be, which resulted in tons of unused but super high quality art that's either been posted on one of our social feeds or has never been seen before we finally found that silver bullet. And so ultimately what we decided to do was we just said, you know what? What if it was none of the characters' faults? What if it was just the player who happened to flip the wrong switch at the very beginning of the game and it was their fault that all these worlds collided? So that's exactly what we did. Anyways, we would probably be here all night if I tried to go through the litany of creative decisions and blockers that had to be made on this title. So I figured I'd just cut to the finished results. We produced a number of spots with congregate to promote this game, and this is our Family Guy focus trailer.
I want a hot dog, ketchup, and some Jell-O, please.
Hey, about while break the side of nervous bunny.
there we go. And then one other fun fact was right when we launched, the way that we were working with all the different studios was ensuring that all 5 shows had to have equal representation throughout the game, which for a game of this scale was insane. But if you look at the logo, you'll actually see that all 5 houses are at the top. And then we would do different things with the logo in some of our trailers to mix up which cars and vehicles would appear there. But yeah, so the initial launch, every show had the same number of cards, the same number of hero characters across the board.
Whose job is that? Like, I can't name a job title, but that's kind of a thing. But my speaker is on my work.
When coming up with making sure all this stays balanced?
Yeah, I guess that's a two-part one. Who decides, like, hey, this is really important, and then who actually goes through and is like checking that it's happening.
It's actually my team. Yeah, so we basically, and I'll get into this in a little bit, but we and let's say the creative director at our partner developer typically leads the charge when it comes to the overall creative vision for the game. And when we work with the different studios, we want to make sure that everybody feels important in this game. And so it's incumbent upon us to make sure that all of those promises are met. So yeah, so it was a big team effort on this one. I know I said that there were 3 other developers working on this thing together, but mostly when it came to specifically branded elements, that was us. So looking at creator and studio pitches, again, before we've even started production, when we're still just working with one of our developers to craft what the vision for this game is going to be. Once we feel like we've got a really good concept, we'll take that to the show's creative team and we'll pitch it to them. This includes the Matt Groenings of the world, basically everybody, without name dropping, basically everybody that you would imagine. But we'll typically do these pitches alongside our partner, depending on whether or not they can be present for them. Usually this involves one of the show's creators or the film's director, depending on what the property is that we're basing off of. And then any key creative execs on the production team who will actually be helping us build the game. So when we look here, what I mean by all of that is that we really do work hand in hand with each of the shows and films' artists, animators, writers, and producers. Here's just a handful of them. And then here's some of the properties that they represent. Okay, so then with that, usually at that stage, that's when we get the green light, and we are off to the races. Okay. Hopefully it doesn't look like that. So what does the green light look like? Well, that means that we can go ahead and we can start laying out the key milestones and targets for the project. We can adapt to our partner's sprint schedule and constantly reevaluate the sprint targets. Continue to hone the game's design. Of course, this typically happens throughout production. Review weekly and bi-weekly builds. Plus review all art, scripts with the film or show's production team, plus the UI design and overall user experience. We also handle talent coordination, constant build showcases to studio executives, legal reviews, titling, etc. And really, it's all just to support the game's production in general. And I think that last point is actually really important because our role can be so undefined at times and very dependent on our partners' needs and really who the developers are that we're working with and their kinds of capabilities. So I think the reason why I want to bring that up also is because, and I have a good example of this. For example, let's say you're working with a partner and they're based in another country, they don't speak English fluently, and they don't have the funds to hire a writer for their narratively driven game. Guess who's writing the script? Anyways, or we are. But so then going from there, what I wanted to jump into was the following 3 aspects of our role that I believe are the most important in what we do. So 1, becoming a genre expert. When we set out to build a game, we're expected to know everything there is about that game genre. And this includes competitors' titles, and of course, what makes them work or not work. Just general history of the genre, how they're marketed, and what it'll take to launch successful user acquisition campaigns and test creative. And especially important for free-to-play games, how to test and tune them, and also run live ops. So bottom line, it just comes down to knowing how to build, launch, and run a quality game. So one of the things that we do at FoxNext are also in-depth market and game reviews. These end up becoming full game teardowns, or as we call them, book reports, in which one of us examines a game from top to bottom. Here was one that I did on Marvel's Spider-Man. Okay, so then 2, becoming a brand expert. Or as I call it, fall in love with everything. So why is this so important? Well, there are a lot of reasons, but namely, the game needs to feel authentic. I think that's obvious. Yeah?
Going back to the previous case,
Sure.
it's like
Yes.
genre expert.
Yeah.
To what extent do you go, you as a team,
Hmm?
in terms of finding out or evaluating your competitive game or whatever game?
Sure.
And how do you compare it to the past experience?
Well, it's a really good question. I think that we look at certainly what the top games are currently that are in a genre that we're looking to explore. We'll always start with them. And then we'll look at the history. I'd say we wouldn't go too far back, but probably, and it helps that the mobile space is so young at this point, but we'll probably go back about 5 years or so and just...
I'm thinking, okay, not just in the timeline, chronological, but also in terms of seeing if they are patterns of development of that generation.
Oh, wow.
Games.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it depends. You know, if we're looking at competitors' products and trying to become a genre expert, we'll look at how the brand has also been used in the past in other game scenarios, including things like tabletop gameplay, certainly console. Really anything noteworthy that we think can inform whatever game it is that we're exploring to potentially build. So it's unfortunately, it's pretty widespread.
And how deep do you go? Just the usage, or do you go look further under the...
I think, you know, it certainly depends on the type of game, but I think we would go as deep as is needed to understand why it was successful or why it wasn't successful. And then also what player reaction was, what the player experience was for all of it.
So it's more of the marketing aspect than technical.
Yeah, I mean, marketing certainly plays a big role in it too, how it's positioned within the marketplace.
Marketing, business, and with that, of course, was the storytelling and
I think so. I think I'm understanding what you're saying.
as opposed to technical, how, you know, how pictures were done and things like that.
Sure, yeah, I don't think we go that deep. Yeah, how the art was created and everything, unless it's in...
Then it involves like how fast it is and other limitations of the equipment that you have to use.
Sure. Yeah, I think, you know, technology changes so fast that typically, especially for a lot of the older stuff, we're only looking at what our engine is and what our capabilities are from there. Yeah, good question though, thank you. So becoming a brand expert, or as I call it, fall in love with everything. So obviously, as I mentioned, the game needs to feel authentic. Fans of our shows and our films are, as you can imagine, extremely hardcore and very quick to call us out on things that just they don't like. And if the game doesn't look or feel like the show, then really you've lost before you've even begun. It's also incumbent on us to know what makes the narrative work. What makes the characters tick, the core themes that resonate with the fans. And lastly, because when you're working with the actual creators of the shows and films, you know, I ask myself this question all the time, why would they trust you to build a game that's based on a piece of their soul if they don't think that you care about it? So I wanted to look at an example of this for my own life that's not related to Fox Brands. I used to work for a company called CBS Interactive, which does similar games to FoxNext. And 70% of what I worked on there was Star Trek, which is probably one of their biggest brands, especially when it comes to gaming. But knowing that I would be working on it and knowing how passionate the fan base was, I made it my mission to start from the beginning and literally watch everything Star Trek. And for those of you who don't know, that now clocks in at approximately 556 hours or around 23 days. Anyway, needless to say, surprise, surprise, I absolutely fell in love with it. I don't know how many of you also like Star Trek. So this is a picture of me. It's a total side note, but yes, I am holding a Type 3 Mark II compression phaser rifle from Star Trek First Contact. And this was actually my profile pic for everything until a friend recommended that I probably wasn't doing me any favors in the dating scene. It had that on it too. Yeah. Okay, so then the third component, becoming a project champion. Though I'm sure it comes as no surprise, a core tenet of the role is really becoming the driving force behind a project within whichever organization you're a part of. A lot of time is spent presenting, negotiating, and also bolstering support from different studio groups, divisions, and teams. And then lastly, it's in large part up to you to maintain the project's vision as the brand holder from beginning to end. And ensure that whatever brand it is, it's integrated as efficiently and authentically as possible. So working with talent, here's a few of the guys I've gotten to work with over the years and some of my favorite experiences. I know that in the event description for this, it specifically mentioned working with talent, so I want to make sure you guys all got your money's worth, since I know tickets were super expensive. But the two key takeaways from working with talent that I want to impart are, one, be flexible. Their schedules can be crazy, and knowing exactly what you need and preparing backup plans is a must. My story with George Takei was obviously when I was working at CBS. We were having him come in to record for one of our games, and on the day of, we lost our sound booth. And this was literally the only day that he could do it for months. And in order to keep with our production, we had to bring him in. So I went into a guy's office, and he and I basically soundproofed the room and just set up an ad hoc sound booth studio in his office. He comes walking in, he looks around, and I kid you not, he goes, "Oh my." His actual line was, "Oh my, how exotic." But he rolled with it, and he was great. It was awesome. He was probably in there for 45 minutes with us, but it was really cool. So then the second key takeaway, context is king. Clearly convincing and explaining exactly how, where, and when an actor's likeness or content will be used goes such a long ways towards dispelling concerns that they or their management teams especially might have about the project. So last year, we launched Marvel Strike Force. And in the summer, to coincide with a certain sequel's release in theaters and subsequent home entertainment release, the whole game became this. And we had the opportunity to ask a certain big celebrity if he'd be able to reprise his role as a certain merc with the mouth. Unfortunately, his schedule was absolutely packed. And initially it was a no, because apparently big movie stars have a lot to do when supporting multi-million-dollar international film releases or something. But after some discussion, we were finally given an opening, an exactly 30-minute window. So in a foreign country. So we sent a very, very small handful of FoxNext guys on a last-minute flight to Dublin to his hotel, again, only for 30 minutes, to record lines of dialogue. And I'm so pleased to say that he was so good, and he knows the character so well, that not only did he read the lines and do a great job, but he actually improved upon the lines on the spot and their delivery, and it resulted in this.
Sorry, just got mine to do the thing. I got kind of jealous and, you were. Deadpool 2 Super Duper Cut available now on digital Blu-ray. Marvel's Triforce. Play for free.
There we go. And then lastly, I did just want to note that working with the Curiosity Company, Rough Draft Studios, TinyCo, and Jam City to literally bring one of the greatest shows on television back to production with the entire cast, animation crew, writers, and Misters David X. Cohen and Matt Groening themselves was a thrill and a privilege that would be tough to beat. I'm not going to cover this right now, but if you want to talk to me about it after, it was certainly a career highlight. So bringing it back around and kind of summing up everything we've talked about so far, I wanted to hone in on what I believe, frankly, as game makers, we're all trying to achieve by calling back to something I said earlier about having a clarity of vision for the game. And I'm going to use two of my favorite narratively driven games from 2018 to do this. So both of these games were incredibly focused on what they wanted to be. From beginning to end. Playing through them felt like they knew the story they wanted to tell. They knew what they wanted the gameplay experience to feel like. And just as importantly, they knew what emotions they wanted to spark in players. To me, in God of War, it's the self-reflection on the decisions that I'll make in my life and how those choices will create a lasting impact and reflection in my own son. In Spider-Man, to me, again, it's what it means to do the right thing, even when it comes at a huge cost. And for those of you who have finished the story, you know what I'm talking about. It sounds so simple, but I honestly can't think of anything more important than having that unity of vision and knowing across your team what you want your game to be, and having that shared sense of what you want your players to feel. When we look at Marvel Strike Force, the team is constantly asking itself, are we achieving what we want the player to feel? And so what do I mean by that? When the player upgrades a character, is that character going to feel like a more powerful part of the player's roster strategy? When the player participates in raids, do they feel like they're actively helping their alliance? And when playing through the narrative, is the player engaged with the story that we're trying to tell? Which is why for a game, especially of this scale, and really for any free-to-play game in the mobile space, it requires so much retuning and rebalancing, especially when new characters or modes are added. Really, it just comes all back to that question, what do we want players to feel? All right, so lastly, I wanted to run through one of our most successful titles and take a look at what goes into building out one of the events for a title like this, which we run on a weekly basis. So for everyone who hasn't had the chance to play it, what is Family Guy: The Quest for Stuff? And actually, by a quick show of hands, how many people in here have played Family Guy: The Quest for Stuff? Okay, nice. So Family Guy: The Quest for Stuff launched in 2014, which makes it a really old game, believe it or not. Featuring all new adventures for Peter Griffin and friends. After Peter epically destroys the city in a battle with the giant chicken, players were tasked with rebuilding Quahog in true city builder fashion. And to do this, players have characters perform timed-based actions to earn currency, unlock new buildings, decorations, and characters for their play spaces. And we do it all in partnership with the actual writers of the show. Beyond the main game, we are constantly running themed limited time events, which along with updating the app icon are used primarily as an effective re-engagement tool for our player base, as well as a great opportunity for the platforms to re-feature us. For a limited time, players can participate in these unique experiences to unlock exclusive decorations, costumes, and characters. So 2 things to note about these events, because this is my life, is that first, they never stop. They could be small, single-week events, or scale up to month-long events, if not even larger. But they're still broken down by weekly content updates with their own weekly challenges. But we're always running one. And each one has brand new content designed from the ground up. Again, on a weekly basis. It really is a massive undertaking to pull this off each week, but because players want it, we do it. And this is what my life feels like. It's event day! All right. So here's some of our event partners, and one of the things that makes Family Guy Customer Stuff so unique is that the partnerships that the game has formed to bring other big brands from other competing companies to the game. Yeah?
How often can you push a new build?
So we'll push a new build about every week or every 2 weeks. Yeah, it depends. Not a lot of the content can be loaded server side, but yeah, it's about that frequent. So be it from other films, shows, comics, toys, etc., which if anyone is familiar with Family Guy, the show, knows that including references to other pop culture fits the show's style as well. But it takes a massive amount of communication coordination to be able to pull these off. Communication, as always, is king. So what do I mean by these licensed events? Well, sometimes our events are seasonally timed, such as our Holiday 2016 event, in which players could unlock a bubble-blowing Stewie. 80s gamer Brian, who loves the totally non-branded Glove of Power, because as we all know, it is so bad. Thank you, Lucas. Yes. Also, Pac-Man, actual Pac-Man from Bandai Namco, Hubert, and the roided out version of the Angry Monkey from Chris's Closet. They all joined too. So sometimes our events are also topical, like when billionaire Peter met Barack Obama. Over the years, Quest for Steph has seen Peter and friends join the USS Enterprise to boldly go where no one has gone before. Go on an adventure with Bill and Ted. Battle Akuma Chicken with lightning Hadoukens. And answer the call of Zordon to join the Power Rangers, both old and new.
Question.
Yeah.
Do you have to get sign-offs or licensing deals from those?
We do. Yeah. So we'll work with our partner on a title like this to set up some sort of licensing structure, but they're all limited time licenses.
How short or long does it take to work those deals out?
Oh man. And I guess it varies on the brand, what else is happening with the brand a lot of the time. Sometimes they're super eager and they're like, oh, now's the perfect time. There's all this other stuff going and we want Family Guy to almost support it in a way. Even though we're not necessarily supporting whatever it is, we just happen to have their brand in our game at the same time. I wish I could give you a better answer. It just varies like crazy.
Yeah, 30 months to, I don't know, take like a year plus.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe not a year plus. Yeah. And then Brian and Stewie, of course, also joined in when they answered the call of Lord Zed. And they were the bad guys in this event. Yeah?
So, given all the different variables that can go into the package,
Sure.
what amount of time that you guys take before getting something ready, especially if you can use that?
I would say it used to be really short. Like it used to be just a couple weeks in advance, which was crazy, especially when working with the Fuzzy Door and Fox Animation television productions team. Because these artists, at the time, they weren't dedicated to this game. They're running a show. And so you've got the writers, in the writing room writing the show, and the artists and animators doing the exact same thing. So to try and steal time away from that so that they could work on our little mobile game was incredibly difficult. But the problem is that we ran into those timing issues. Now we are much better at it. Now we've got guys over there. I mean, the game's been out for so long. They know what it takes to create the content for this. And they know how to schedule their time accordingly to be able to help us support it. That I would say we're probably closer to about 2 months out. Month and a half, 2 months, somewhere around there. Unfortunately, a lot of the licenses can sometimes come in super last minute. And so things can change last minute. But as far as I know, we've never missed an event launch date by more than like a day and a half. So there's been tiny gaps in there, but that's about it. So then in early 2018, for 2018's first big event, and when I say big, I mean about 4 to 6 weeks, we worked with TinyCo and Mattel on a very special property, which had the following narrative setup, and brought us a team up with He-Man. And we called it Peter and the Masters of the Universe. Super original. And here's Peter. Anyways, all right.
So it's not just 1 week content updates here and gone.
So they are, yeah. So something like that for Barbarian Peter, as we called him, because He-Man was a separate character in the game. You could unlock him during the event period, but then as soon as the event period ended, players who had unlocked him kept him forever. But then any players who didn't, he was gone for good. So players in these events collect items to craft tools and weapons in the weapons workshop. Again, all of this is specific just to this event. Select and power up their characters, and then also do battle with the forces of evil. Here, Trapjaw Joe is taking on a barbarian enemy. So when we look at these events, they're really games within the game. So the player could continue down the normal progression path and the normal quest line of the game, but then also take part in these special events, which honestly take just as much time as it does to play the actual game. So occasionally players have to make the choice, do I want to continue progressing down the evergreen path, or do I want to take time and actually dedicate it to Peter and the Masters of the Universe? Yeah?
Do you ever revisit quests? So you said that you do quests and then it's locked in. Do you ever revisit like events that you've had previously in the past to allow players to possibly get what they missed?
Funny enough, so the game, as I mentioned, it's pretty old now. We never have, which is crazy. Again, you know, it's sitting on my side and look at the schedule that we face. It's pretty nuts. But the value that players place on unlocking those characters and being able to unlock those characters within that specific amount of time means so much to them that when we've dabbled in re-releasing a character for just like a day or something like that, especially a branded character in some way, we've dabbled in that. The player response is, what are you doing? I spent all this time and now you're basically just giving them away. And so it erodes that player confidence that they have with us in the game. The only times when we will see some stuff reappear for specific characters is around like a best of the year event, best of 2016, best of 2017, that sort of thing. But those aren't the full play space. They're not the full storyline that goes through the event. They'll really just be the individual characters and that little character's storyline, but that's it. So similar to our other larger events, this one featured its own play space extension for players to adventure through in an epic battle for what we called Peternia. You can see here that players will actually start off at the bottom of this mountain and then make their way to the top of Mount Herbert over the course of the event. Yeah?
That buying and that valuation of things like that, is that a conscious decision from the design, the design phase, or is that something that was subtle?
Really good question. So it originally, the game actually wasn't as event-driven as it became. When it launched, for a while, it was actually just the core quest line. And then we started to work in some non-branded stuff, just to kind of experiment with it a little bit, short 1 or 2 week events. And the players responded to it so well. And I think it's because it fits into the overall Family Guy aesthetic and all of their cutaway gags so well. But no, at the time it was not as event focused as it is, or as it became. But I would say probably within the first 3 months of it being out, all of a sudden it became, we need to run events. Like, this is what players like. They want to do this, and so everything shifted in that direction. So throughout the adventure, I know I mentioned him already, but they'll meet and unlock characters like He-Man, Beastman, Hordak, I always mispronounce this. Is it Thusla Doom or Thusla Doom? Anyways, Skeletor Stewie, and among others, Mayor Man Mig. And that's it. But happy to answer any other questions about FoxNext or our projects. Yeah.
This isn't a question, but as you answer questions, can you repeat the question back into the microphone so that you mix it up?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I can do that.
I also have a question.
Sure.
What do you think of the Orville? What can we expect in Orville game?
Oh man, I would love to make an Orville game. Sorry, practice. The question was, what do you think of the Orville and when can we expect an Orville game? So I will start that with a statement, which is, I love the Orville. I think I had a slide in here a lot earlier that talked about looking at a brand and having enough brand content to be able to support a game. The Orville's incredible. We love working with Seth MacFarlane. I swore I wasn't going to name drop, but he would be one of those people that we go in to pitch to when we're working on his baby, essentially. And it's certainly, obviously discussions have happened in the past. Yeah, I would love to see one. I'm hoping one will come soon. We'll see how it goes. Yeah. Yes.
Another licensing related question.
Sure.
You're anticipating a game or games that you work on in the past, like Orville, that have recognizable theme music and stuff. How often are you able to use music from the show or license that or not?
Really good question, because that is something that I myself and my team work specifically on, a lot of the time. It really depends on who owns it. We're lucky at Fox that, and so the question was, how much licensed music can we actually use in one of our games on specific shows or specific films? We're lucky that Fox Music, which is a separate division within the greater Fox organization, owns a lot of the music that gets produced for these series. So typically, we'll work with them. If we're working on a pure licensed property and not something that we're co-developing, then typically we'd look at a situation like that where our licensee would be the one who would work with Fox Music to license that music for whatever the project is that they're working on. But in that role, we would simply play facilitators. If it's something more like a co-development situation, then we'd be actively involved in that. It kind of depends. I will say one other note on that. It certainly depends on the type of game. Unfortunately, as we all know, pretty much everybody plays games on their phone with no sound on, which is unfortunate because we put a lot of time into our sound effects and the music that's in these games. It's great, when the player first turns on the game, but as they continue to play the game, it becomes less and less important to their experience, or at least to most players' experiences. I still like to play with headphones on because I want that full experience. But yeah, it definitely varies from project to project, but I'm happy to say that we actually get to do it quite often. Yeah. Yes?
When you're working in a really fantastic presentation,
Oh, thank you.
And when you're working in a really storied space like Marvel, right, you have to consider comics that go all the way back to like the 60s, the various animated incarnations that exist in the portfolio, the franchise, and then like the direction that Gunn and others are taking, like Guardians of the Galaxy and film adaptations, which isn't necessarily the same as the way it's historically been portrayed. How you decide where to hew in that game and who makes that call? You're working with a studio, are you guiding them and like whether they should hew closer to the movie to try to support the movie, or is it hew closer to like what the core concept from the comic was? Sorry again.
No, that's fine. I'm going to try and distill it, if that's okay. So the question was, especially on a property like Marvel, which has so many incarnations over so many years, how do we choose what to take from where? And who decides? It's a really good question. So I can't give you a specific answer for Marvel because I did not make that call. But I can say that when we look at a scenario like that, we typically look at two factors. One, what is the player base that we're expecting that's going to be playing the game? Is there a specific demographic? And if there is, what are their experiences with the brand, their previous experiences with the brand? and then typically we will err in that direction. We know with a brand like Marvel, which can bring in so many new Marvel fans that have either only seen the films or maybe one of the animated TV series from like the 90s, that they're already going to have their preconceived notions. Luckily, we've got a fantastic art team that looks through the entire catalog of Marvel. Like a good example is Storm. Storm has changed her look so many times. And they say, okay, when players go into the game and they want to get Storm, are they going to be more satisfied with the current comic incarnation? Are they going to be, would they prefer it look like a Halle Berry version? Or would they prefer it look like the all-white outfit from the 90s animated series? No matter what. Yes, no matter what. And they will let us know. They absolutely let us know, which is part of the job. Marvel has been a fantastic partner to work with. It's been so cool to see and hear about some of the submissions that have gone to them and how flexible they are with everything. The support that they provided for the game has been incredible. And really, a lot of the time, it seems like, although they never said this to me, it seems like they've just let us do what we want to do and what we feel passionate about. So if we have an artist or an animator who feels really passionate about one incarnation of a certain storied hero, and we think it's going to resonate with either our existing player base or the player base that we're hoping to bring into the game based on those past incarnations, we'll go with that one. Yeah. But I wish I could say I made that decision, but I don't always make those decisions. Yeah. Yes?
Touching on what you just said, as far as with any kind of game, no matter what, the influx of new players always is critical, especially keeping the longevity of the game.
Yeah.
So given how in like family diet and stuff for stuff, you make the decision of the event or the thing to have events that will occur once. Have you seen it as a negative effect on new players adopting because they see all these things and then they realize they can't get it?
So that's a question we're always asking ourselves. Fortunately or unfortunately, we've been asking that question for the last almost 5 years now. There is a negative effect, certainly, because especially for brand new players, they don't always have all the characters unlocked to be able to compete effectively in a lot of those events. So they're only able to, let's say, unlock some of the base level characters. I'm proud of the fact that, in this case, I have to give a lot of credit to TinyCo, who designed the game, that they made the core storyline so compelling and the different characters that you want to unlock in that so compelling that when you're starting off, even if you don't get to compete as effectively in some of the events, the characters that you're unlocking through the core storyline are enjoyable enough, and it's an enjoyable enough experience that you're happy just to keep doing that for the most part. I can't obviously speak for all players, as I know that there is some frustration out there with how difficult those are for new players. But I think that the game really benefits from having that solid, non-event, just straight base narrative. We did not get the question for that. So the question was, do we see, correct me if I'm wrong, do we see players that get frustrated and potentially churn from not being able to compete effectively in these events, especially early on? Is that most of it?
Especially for newer players.
Especially for newer players.
Yeah, new players see, here's all this old great stuff, I'll never be able to get it.
Right. So a lot of players who would jump in and see all this old great stuff that they'll never be able to get. So for the most part though, in that scenario, they will only see, a lot of players only see that older content if they jump into their friends' play spaces. But otherwise, when it's gone, we're definitely not, resurfacing, hey, you missed out on the, Peter the Barbarian event. Sorry, you'll never be able to get him. So there's no constant reminders of something like that.
For context, for those of us that haven't played it, is it always a solo play experience, or saying, but with friends, you can see their play spaces, and that's one time you get exposure to the older content? Yeah,
so for this game, it's primarily a single player game. We do have a social component in it, which I believe is called Face Space, and you're able to jump into your friends' face spaces and explore their cohog a little bit, but that's really the limit of it.
Does everyone have a top 8 face spaces?
They do not. No, but you do get the face-to-face profiles of other Family Guy characters. Yeah.
So a question going back to talent.
Sure.
How do you manage that? You know, what I'm saying is that sometimes the game asks for your own game, and then you're actually doing these promos and outside, and it's all staying the same range, or you're saying budget, so you have to actually go on. How do you manage that? I don't know if it used to be like a crazy thing where sometimes talent actually would show up and say, like, hey, am I actually doing this or not?
Oh man, it absolutely varies on a case-by-case basis. I would say that we're lucky that. Oh right, yes. Gosh, I get better at that. So the question was, when working with talent, how do we manage that? Basically, I'm already jumping ahead, but basically, how do we? How are they compensated depending on what the project is? Do they show up to, let's say, a recording booth and say, am I actually getting paid for this? And how does that all work out? Is that basically it? So, yeah, it does vary from project to project. We're lucky that in a lot of our shows and our films, a lot of that is actually pre-negotiated, which is great. And typically, you know, since so many of the recurring talent, let's say in a TV show, participates in some way in the back end, then this is just helping the show, and all that's already been worked out, which is great. That's not always the case, and a lot of the time, especially for non-recurring talent, they won't have a deal or something like that set up already, in which case we will have to negotiate in some way. And really, you know, it depends on who we're working with, and it depends on what they think their time is worth, and you know what they're going to bring to the game, and what we think they're going to bring to the game. But it can vary wildly. We've had involvement from some showrunners and composers and a few actors who love the brand so much that they've come in to do it for just next to nothing, because they just want to support the brand, and they know that the game's going to help support the show or the film. Those are always my favorite, because they're just so happy to be there.
Is there any situation where you had a ceremony actually coming in and it wasn't planned for because it affected your schedule? Because once you pass a certain threshold, you can't go back, right? So you get the limit and you're like, okay, that's actually part of what we actually design out actually, or all the stuff together to actually do the promotion.
So basically the question was, sometimes when having a person come in when it's unscheduled, does that affect our overall production timeline? It can. Funny enough, more often than not, we're actually the ones who are going after them and trying to catch them in some way to fit our timeline. Typically when we look at these projects, because talent schedules can be so crazy and everything, we never count on it. We'll always do the best that we can, and sometimes if we have to get it in later, thankfully, nearly all of our games are live service based, so we can always update it later if we need to. But we're typically the ones chasing them. So like a scenario would be if I'm working on an Ice Age game, which has a huge cast, and they're coming in to do pickups, even just 2 to 3 months before a film comes out, and I know that they're going to be in the booth. I'm driving from Playa Vista up to the studio lot to like jump in there and say, oh, would you mind saying this? But obviously a scenario like that would also depend on what their deal is for the film and how that would all work out, and whether or not they'd be compensated for the work that they're doing for the game. Yeah. Yes. Let's go. I just want to answer one of you. We'll go with him.
But just along with that, if you have a deal that's not pre-negotiated, the SAG-AFTRA and new media agreement's pretty friendly, so it couldn't be very expensive to do for lesser talent if we work on at minimum. Right. Yeah, no, it's in the past for new records. I'm sorry. So the question was working with some of the guilds and their involvement and the associated costs and the costs that would bring to the production, and how that would affect our ability to use them or use their work. So I think, thankfully, in the times that we have done it, the scenarios that we've set up to do brand new records and not simple things like voice lifts from films or TV shows. We have an established roster of people that we've already worked with who can handle guild clearances, guild-based voice directors that we can bring in to help with the project, because everybody has to be
SAG or AFTRA or what have you. And yeah, we'll look at the overall associated cost with it and figure out whether or not that makes sense for the budget of the game, and kind of just go from there. Yeah.
Do you need any more water?
No, I'm okay. Thank you.
Actual question.
Yes. The question was, do I need any more water? My answer was no.
I only caught part of the slide that said communication is king, and from the images I remember, was that regarding with the license holders?
So yes, that was that slide. So the question was, which slide or which aspect of my presentation was communication is king? And the answer is yes. Typically with I mean, you could apply it to a lot of scenarios, let's be honest, but I've found, especially when working with other license holders, the more communication, the better. You know, you never know what else is going on in somebody else's workday. If you're working with a licensor at another studio, you never know how fast they're gonna get back to you. The more communication, the more you're able to talk about the project, how their brand is gonna be utilized, everything, especially up front, the better, and the smoother road process it makes.
Does that tend to be weekly, or, I know it's probably gonna be different with everybody, but what do you guys shoot for?
So the question was, how often do we communicate with other license holders? It depends on what it is that we're working with them on. If it's something like, let's say the Family Guy, The Quest for Stuff, and we're doing He-Man, in this case it'd be an artist at TinyCo and a producer at TinyCo who'd be working at this point directly with the license holder to do image clearances. They're actually pretty fast at responding to those. I mean, it's interesting. I found that when I draft up a full email, 3 paragraphs, and I send it over, it doesn't get a response for a week. But I send over an image of Pac-Man, and somebody looks at it for 2 seconds and says, okay, it looks like Pac-Man, you're good to go. It's as frequent as we need it to be to get all the assets ready for the game.
And sorry, the real question I was trying to set up for was, do they usually, the license holders, usually have like a veto power and review process or compliance person?
Yeah, I mean, it's typically, so the question was, do the license holders typically have somebody with veto power or approval?
Yeah, I wasn't sure how hands-on or off.
Sure, so, and the follow-up was, he wasn't sure how hands-on or how hands-off they were. Yeah, typically those are the people that we'd be negotiating with anyways for the license. A lot of the time it'd be either them themselves or somebody within their group who's set up already to be able to handle license approvals. I guess it depends on the brand, but once you reach the stage that they know, let's say, a brand is going to be going into Family Guy, and they know what Family Guy's style looks like, and a pitch has already been made to them with their character in the Family Guy style. So again, you know, they can see it all up front and make a decision from there. Then typically it all moves pretty fast because there's just not a lot of surprises. But to answer your question, yes, they do have veto power. If they saw our version of He-Man and they thought he looked terrible, we just have to keep redoing it until we reach the version that they like. Yeah, in the back.
Oh, I want to ask you one question.
Yeah.
How is it that you make the game confusing enough to have folks park their cash? Like, I'm so, well, older, I played these games in the 90s, I obviously avoided the games based upon series because I heard about the mentioned before being super before.
Sure.
So how is it that you as players do purposely communicate? Well, running is one thing, but placing the purpose after that.
Sure. So I think it's a twofold question. It's one, how do we entice players to jump into a game that's based on a big brand? And then two, how do we entice players to spend in the game? So obviously it depends on the game's business model. I think the first one, and what I'm really proud of my team for being able to do, especially with our Fox properties, is really make them feel like authentic experiences. when we look at Futurama Worlds of Tomorrow, or we look at Family Guy: The Quest for Stuff, or Family Guy, this is an actual title for those of you who haven't heard it, Family Guy: Another Freaking Mobile Game. All of those start off with fully produced animated sequences that were done with the shows themselves and with the voice actors. So right when you jump in, it feels like you're playing the animated show. I think even before that, when we look at the marketing creative that we're putting out there, there's a lot of testing that goes on, especially in soft launch, to see what players are going to respond to. So we'll try, if it's a banner ad or a mobile ad, really we don't know for sure what players are going to respond to when they see an advertisement, so we'll test out a lot. We generally have a good idea, but since so many of our games are narratively driven, we'll tend to play that up first and see if that gets the kind of response that we need to get players in. But it's kind of a whole mix of things. I think at the end of the day, at least I hope with Fox properties and the other properties that I've worked on in the past, that there's some level of trust there that we're not going to put something out that's going to damage the brand. I would like to say that under my purview that will never happen. And I will say that will never happen. But yeah, and so the more of these that we do, the more that I hope players will trust us to be able to at least try them out. And then so the second half of that question is, how do we get players to spend in specifically a free-to-play game or a premium game?
Well, either one.
Okay.
How can we free-to-play?
Sure. Yeah, so the question is, how do we get players to spend to either buy a premium game or spend in a free-to-play game? When it comes to premium, as I'm sure a lot of us know, the price is just right there. Typically in a game like Alien Blackout, that's a premium game. It's $4.99. There's no in-app purchases. This is a mobile experience, a self-contained mobile experience. When we look at something like a free-to-play game, still to this day, I think that the average metric that floats around on the internet, that only 2% of your player base is spending in your free-to-play game, still holds true. So it's still a very, very small minority of free players, or people playing free-to-play games, that are actually spending in your game. I think that what it comes down to is some combination of time pressure, social pressure, brand affinity, wanting to perform better in the game. Really, it depends on the type of game. But we look at all of those things because we do want players to spend in our games, but at the same time, we don't want them to spend and have a bad experience. So that's why when we look at a lot of our games, they're really designed around, if you choose to buy something, you're going to have a better time playing this game, if that's what you want to do. But at the same time, again, there's such a fine balance. For the players who simply don't want to spend at all, we have to make sure that the game is enjoyable for them too. So it really comes down to a lot of things. But I hope that answers your question. Sure. Yeah. Yes.
This might be too broad of a question, but how do your users respond to rewarded interstitials?
So the question was, how do our users respond to rewarded interstitials? Actually, really well. Surprisingly. It's not a huge metric in terms of the percentage of players that actually engage in them, but it's the more we did it in our titles, the more that I was actually surprised by how many players do participate in them. I think the key with those is just making sure that players know that they are non-essential, purely compulsory. If they want to do them, and typically, as you mentioned, the reward element of it, of being able to, whether it's refresh a time countdown or give some sort of premium currency or give something that makes them feel like their time was well spent watching whatever that rewarded video is. There's a real art to doing that. I think when I look at our games, we've been pretty successful with being able to do that. And so far, I think the players have responded well, at least as well as I would imagine that they would. Was there a second part to that?
Well, like I was maybe looking for a measure
I wish I could answer that. Unfortunately, yeah, I can't, because so many of our games, especially in external development, are done with external partners. I can't speak to too many specific metrics. Yes?
So this is kind of like a two-part question. Second part, depending on the answer. I would imagine that most of the, you guys get a lot of pitches, right? When you work with an external partner, it's not like you're going out searching for a studio to do a certain game. They will come to you and say, we have this idea with this property and this type of game. Is that correct?
I would say, so the question was, how often do other game studios come to us saying that they want to work on a specific, let's say, brand with a specific game in mind, as opposed to us going to them? I would say most of the time that's the case. Most of the time, let's say there would be a studio out there that is interested in one of our brands. Somebody at the studio says, hey, I love this brand, and to me, it's completely underserved in the market. I really want to make a game for it. Let's talk to Fox. I would say most of the time that is how it's done. But there is this whole other element of it too. When we look at just the XDev, it's myself in production, with a bunch of other people. We've got a marketing department, and we have a business development department. And we're super active that when we're out there just on our own playing games, and we're seeing what players are really responding to in the marketplace, we're such huge fans of our own shows that if we think there's a good matchup there, we reach out. We absolutely reach out and see if we can figure out something to work on together. Yeah.
The second part of the follow-up is you answered in front of it. You identify like the process that you go through when you identify whether it's work with a partner or not.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give a little bit of insight into maybe some of the pitfalls that studios have fallen into, or that basically have made it so that you decide that?
So the question was, can I give some insight into some of the pitfalls that either we or other studios have fallen into when working with outside developers on past titles?
Mainly like outside developers that come to you with an idea and then
Sure.
they fall into it.
So mainly outside developers that have come into us and something that's fallen apart because of it. Yeah, I know I'm beating this drum a lot, but when we start working on a project, we won't pass the green light phase unless there is perfect clarity on what we are all building together. In projects that I have seen fall apart before, either at this studio or at other studios, a lot of the time when you look back on the project, you can see that very early on something was amiss, or everybody hadn't really thought things through, or how this whole thing was going to operate. Unfortunately, whether or not the brand was a really good fit for this game type, and whether fans thought that fans of whatever the show or the film was were really going to respond to this game type, I think it really comes at the beginning of the project and what that vision for the game is. Which is why, before we even show a potential game that we want to work on to any of the TV or film production studios, we make sure that it is tight and it makes sense, and it's not only going to leverage their brand, but it's going to be a phenomenal fan experience. And we try and answer as many of those unknown questions as possible. Typically, you're able to answer more of those unknown questions when you're working with a studio that's already developed a game in that genre, and especially one that's already worked with a big brand before. Unfortunately, there's no guarantee though. But yeah, I would say as solving as many problems as early on as possible. Yeah, sure. Anything else? Yes?
I have a question about, when talking about launching new content on the other apps, is it easier or more cost-effective than launching a brand new game? So would you continue supporting the whole thing? Like we were talking about family stuff.
Sure.
So even now, would it still cost-effective to support that?
Yeah, well, I mean, so luckily, so we still are. So the question was, is it still cost-effective to be able to support an older game with new events as opposed to just launching a brand new game? So for something like Family Guy, we have an incredibly dedicated fan base, a lot of whom have been there since the beginning. They love experiencing these storylines. Most of them have maxed out the single non-event path and have collected all the characters and all the buildings and rebuilt their Quahog. And so now for them, all there really is to do is participate in each of these events that we're releasing on a weekly basis. So as long as the fans want it, and as long as they're dedicated enough, we'll continue to do it. I mean, I think that's the easy answer, but I don't know. We'll see. The game's been out since April of 2014, and it's still going strong. So it's all done, for a game like that, it's all done between 3 companies. It's done between FoxNext Games, TinyCo, which has been bought by Jam City. They're a San Francisco-based company, and then the show itself. The show being, in this case, a mix between Seth MacFarlane's Fuzzy Door Productions and Fox Television Animation. So, yes?
No, we have time for one more question.
Okay. Last question. I can't tell if that's your hand raising or not. Okay. Yes, in the back.
At the very beginning, you said you had 3 studios that can solve problems in 30 minutes as opposed to 3 days.
Sure. Oh man. So the question was, at the very beginning, we had 3 studios that could solve a 3-day problem in 30 minutes. Or solve a problem in 30 minutes instead of 3 days. So that, unfortunately, and if he ever sees this, I apologize, Corey. I took his quote when he was talking about working with Guerrilla Games. I guess each of those 2 studios sent teams for 1 week to each other. So the Guerrilla Games guys got to work with Sony Santa Monica, and Sony Santa Monica got to work with the Guerrilla Games guys. And just having that simple communication led them to be able to solve a lot of the problems that each of them were facing on specifically the PlayStation 4 and the way that the console's set up. I think I have to go back and just say that I meant that more in a general term, to simply say that the knowledge shared between these groups, I think, makes it more than the sum of its parts. And certainly, in my time since 2017, the amount that I have learned by being able to work so closely with these other teams, especially former Aftershock employees who've joined us, has been incredible. Speaking only for myself, of course. Yeah. Okay. That's it. Thank you, guys.